in medical training, there's almost no attention given to after-death care. Our job stops when that breath is no longer in the body. The soul is no longer in the body. There's no lines on the EKG monitor. And even in hospice palliative care training, the after-death care piece is not emphasized. I think Caroline spoke to Ruth came gave a 1-hour talk, and that was our extent. So this is unlike the first two where I had a lot to offer. I'm going to hand it over to them soon. But I will tell you what I've seen in my experience is the default mode and way of caring for the loved one who's died. Oftentimes now I'm referring specifically to people who've died in a hospice facility or in their home under hospice. This is the scenario. So a loved one dies in a home or facility. Immediately the funeral home or crematory is notified of the death, and people oftentimes start wailing and mourning right then, and tend to practical needs right away. The body's picked up and transported to the funeral home and prepared by professionals, making it as lifelike oftentimes as possible for the funeral service, or kept under refrigeration in a big refrigerator before cremation. And then the funeral service is held and the body is buried or cremated. And I want to say also, feel free to ask questions throughout. There's not going to be a question and answer session at the end. And please, you guys chime in anytime. I think we do things a lot differently, even thinking in terms of organ donations, but so much of what we do after the death of someone would be different if we had this perspective. Something to consider, we should all consider. So here's another scenario. And again, there's many variations in between. So this scenario, again, I put the old scenario up there. So a loved one dies at a facility, and then loved ones gather to do rituals involving bathing, anointing with oils, doing prayers at the bedside. I have seen this done at the inpatient facility where I work, and it's a very magical, profound experience for all involved, caregivers, staff, families, and possibly the one who's died. Then instead of the grief and the mourning being the focus at this moment, oh my gosh, my loved one, I've had people, truly faint and pass out, have these intense grief reactions at the bedside at the time of death. So instead of that being the primary focus, the care of the body and the loved one is the focus. So rituals are complete, and I'm not saying anything I say is not a judgment, or there's no right way to do this. I'm just telling you my experience and what I've seen and other ways to approach this and other perspectives to have. So taking care of the body, honoring that soul that has departed is leaving the body, comes first. Then the funeral home and crematory is notified, and this often happens where they say, hey, we at our inpatient facility say you can stay with the loved one for up to 6 to 8 hours. So we'll notify the funeral home, and the loved one will stay with the body for that time. And then one approach is the body's picked up by the funeral home, or the other is taken home. And that's happened at the inpatient facility. A gentleman died there and was transported home, and Caroline was involved in that care of that person at home for a home funeral. So transported by family vehicle, which is something I didn't even know was legal. And we'll talk more about that, I'm sure.
Unless it's across state.
Right. Right.
You have to have a
transit permit. Yeah.
And I would say it's very typical. We just call that a delayed pickup if we're notified that someone has died. Then we say, when do you want us to come? And
that's great.
Yeah, very often someone's driving in from another town or something, and yeah, funeral homes will wait. It's just called a delayed pickup. If you tell the funeral home what time you want them to come, they will come at the time that you say.
Then the body, instead of being prepared by others that aren't directly connected to the one who's died, the body's tended to by family and friends, and kept in the home up to 3 days. So I've had the honor of being with 2 individuals who've done this. One was for 1 day, and another was 1.5 to 2 days. And I can't even, that's why I got interested in this topic, actually. I've known about after-death care and home funerals and even been interested in what happens, but never fully immersed and excited about learning more. And, so anyway, so those were profound experiences, and I was touched by them. So then a funeral service is held, or a celebration of life in the home, and the body is then cremated or buried. And in some cases, that can be done on your own land, and there's legalities county by county around that. I focus just on that time, at the time of death, to the disposition of the body. Is that the right word? And then we'll move into those. I know there's a lot of meat there. So, and if you're Meredith, I mean, I'm sure Caroline can speak to it too. So there's this book, Sacred Dying, by a woman named Megary Anderson. Are you familiar with her? Celebrating Rituals for Embracing the End of Life. And this is an excerpt from that book. So given our society's taboos, it's not easy introducing the possibility of attending to the body and soul of the person who has just died. And I know when I talk to my family about this home funeral thing, they will look at me odd, and they will not feel comfortable with this topic. I know it. And I've brought it up to one friend who is 94 and died, and she wasn't interested, and that was okay. But at least the option was presented. So most people do not want to face this unfamiliar work. Moreover, our standard way of handling the time immediately after death has not always been healthy. One friend, Daphne, in talking about the death of her baby daughter from SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome, said that as soon as the paramedics were called in and had determined that the baby was dead, they escorted her out of the room, immediately taking the baby from the house. And this is not uncommon, even in my experience. In the hospital setting, when a loved one dies, everyone leaves the room, and nurses and medical professionals take care of the body. There was no time to say goodbye, to hold the baby, change the baby's clothes, or to have any say in what was to be done. All this amplified the trauma and horror of the situation, and Daphne never recovered from the grief. For those, however, who have broken tradition and tried new ways of handling the after-death experience, it has been life-changing. So, one thing Caroline said at the funeral training was, you don't know until you ask. And so I think part of the intention of this series is just to be informed, not to say one way is wrong or right, and there's no right way, but to just be aware of the options. And there are many exceptions to this rule in terms of, I've also seen the hospital take great care to take care of someone, sudden infant death in utero, intrauterine death. So things have changed, and I don't know how long. She's been practicing a long time. So in terms of rituals, and what's your name?
Yes.
Sorry.
My name's Miranda.
Miranda. So Miranda just shared an experience of bathing her mother after she died of 10 weeks in a coma, after being at 10 weeks in a coma. Sorry, they can't hear.
Yeah, and my brother and I were going, we were sort of midwiving her death, and we didn't know what another.
It's beautiful.
But it was like, we set up the space around her, we had our music playing, we kept the lights low, we had essential oils diffusing, and, I mean, we read the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, and a bunch of other stuff, and just went with our instincts. And it was after her death when we both went home, because we were both home for 3.5 months. People would say, "Oh, I'm so sorry, what a terrible thing." And I would say, well, actually it was one of the most extraordinary experiences of my life, and one of the most luminous events I've ever experienced.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, it's profound to offer rituals at the time of death. And so, ritual, there are many definitions, but a ceremonial act or action in honor of the loved one who's died. And they can be very complicated rituals. A lot of the religious rituals are, but they can also just be personalized and meaningful, whatever's meaningful to you. So bathing your mom's body and having music playing, and that's a beautiful ritual and a way to sanctify the room and space and her.
Yes.
Yeah, so objects used, music, water, candles, oils, religious objects, incense. Those are some of the objects. So Megary talks about some of the purposes of ritual in this setting. So one of them is helping the soul, so focusing on the soul that's leaving. acknowledging that there's been a shift and a change through prayer, song, affirmation, poems, putting flowers in the hands just to honor that journey. And I know a few people have asked us to open the window at the time of death so that the soul can leave. And people do that in nursing homes, unbeknownst to everybody, all the other staffs in nursing homes. So it's something that people do, covering mirrors. So there's many different ways of honoring that that soul has left the body, just taking a moment to do so.
Those are both Jewish traditions. They might be from something
Oh, I didn't realize the crack in the window, because this family said they didn't have any belief system, so, yeah. So then honoring the body, washing, purifying the body, clothing the body, staying with that body for a few days, just the immediate family and friends, and preparing that body for funeral is shrouding and anointing with oils, or anointing with oils and shrouding. It's just a powerful experience for all involved. And then beginning the morning, planning the pre-funeral ceremonies and wakes with the greater community. Oftentimes family members are more prepared to be social, if you will, or in a bigger setting with their larger community after they've had some time. Trish Rux, she's an RN who was here the second series and presented. She created this anointing ritual and got it passed through the VA's system. So it took a long time. And at first they said, no, this is too personal, it's too difficult, we're not doing it. But she was able to get this passed, so now it's available to people in the VA. And I just wanted to share it with you as an example of what you can do for your loved one with essential oils, music playing, candles lit. First asking families and friends, well, in your case, if you're doing it personally, you don't have to ask anybody. It's up to you and your loved one. So putting a touch of lavender oil, and this is a suggested script, if, of course, these are true. We anoint this body that has lived so well. May he or she be at peace. We anoint these eyes that have seen so much. We anoint these lips that have spoken love and truth. We anoint these shoulders that have borne so many burdens with grace. We anoint these hands that have worked so hard. We anoint this heart that has loved so well. May he or she be at peace. And we anoint these feet that have traveled so far. And there's a much more elaborate one in this book, so you could create one. And just even taking a moment to do that is powerful. So of course, if your loved one is allergic to lavender, don't use it.
You might not know.
You might not know, right? So being mindful of that.
Trish told me that the only essential oil that they will let you use at the VA is lavender. So she would prefer frankincense, but lavender's like on the list. So she's like, all right, I'll take it.
So yeah, I will pass it on to Meredith now.
I'm going to talk obnoxiously loud because this is I'm excited that all you people are here. And I actually prepared just a short 8 minutes, supposedly. I practiced it and it was 8 minutes. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to say what I have to say for 8 minutes. And then we will have time to talk. And I'm very glad to talk one-on-one with people that have specific questions, okay? So my name's Meredith Springs, and I'm very glad to be here with my friends, Aditi and Caroline, and my mom, Deborah, and my friends, Ann and Maggie, and all of your beautiful faces here. I've lived in Asheville with my husband for about 12 years, and we have 2 medium-sized boys. They're not so little anymore. But I'm originally from High Point, North Carolina. Really, I think I was just like you guys. I wanted to know what to do when someone dies. And so I started doing research about 4 years ago in earnest and ended up in mortuary school, which I finish next week. 3 years, and I finish next week. Thank you. Thank you. It's very gratifying. And at the end of August, I will complete my year-long apprenticeship and get my North Carolina funeral director's license. So I'm actually getting a funeral director funeral directing and embalming license, because there's some things under the purview of embalming that, like closing the eyes and the mouth, and some kinds of sanitary care that really do, in certain situations, for example, when someone's been in a traumatic accident, and restorative work is something that the family desires, then that is under the purview of embalming. So as Caroline said, of course, that's not a requirement. And where I work at Ray Funeral and Cremation Service, the owner, he maintains that you can't tell the difference between an embalmed body and a body that's been in refrigeration. And the big difference is the care, you know, washing and dressing. I mean, it's amazing to see. Some people die looking very peaceful, and some people really don't. Some people really don't look very peaceful. But with care, and it's not like this very specialized kind of care. It's the kind of care that family members can provide. Then there is this peace, this, you know, peaceful expression on the face, and that is absolutely possible with care. But I don't think it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with embalming. So, yeah. So we're talking about body care and funerals, and the word funeral actually means a ceremony with the body present. So that's the difference between a funeral and a memorial service, is that the body is present. So usually when we go to a funeral and the body is there, then that body is going to be buried. You know, you're going to go to the cemetery after the service and bury the body. But you can have a ceremony with the body present, and then that body is taken to be cremated, or you can have the cremation take place before the service, and then the urn is present, and that's called a memorial service. And even if the urn isn't present, then there's usually, it's really like an altar set up for that person, even if it's just a photograph, but some kind of physical representation of the person at their service. So, two things I would like to put out there about funerals is when we're thinking about imagining, picturing in our minds our own deaths, is that is a time, there's going to be a time, a last time that someone sees your body. That's going to be an event that happens. There's going to be a moment when it's the last time that you're seen. And your body is also going to have a final resting place. So there's those two, just to kind of, I mean, this is a lot to think about. I know, I mean, I understand, this is a lot to think about. So I just want to kind of ground how we're thinking about it into these moments. Being seen for the last time, and where your final resting place is. In grief theory, the funeral is seen as the first time, the first event, like the first family event without the person who's died. So when we die, we don't cease to have a relationship with the world. We don't cease to have relationships with our loved ones, but that relationship is different than it was when we were alive. And so a funeral is, or, you know, all of this after death care, I'm going to call it the funeral because it's like that time immediately after death. That's a time when we're redefining our relationship to the person that has passed. So it's a rite of passage. It's a transformation. It's a change. It's not like the person goes away or our relationship goes away, but that relationship has to be different because the person is not going to be responding, physically present. You know, it's not, I mean, that's just the reality of it. It's not the same. So, I'm speaking in this, like, we're talking about our death, like when I die, thinking about what I want to do with my body. And you have to put yourself in that place of what that's going to be like. And so I just really want to take a moment to pause to acknowledge all of you for being willing to do that, because this right here, talking about it, is what is going to help transform and help shift this whole conversation. We're actively creating it right now. And it's not necessarily an easy thing to do, is sit around and think about really making plans. I mean, I'm a crier, and sometimes I just, it hits me what I would do, or, oh, who would I ask to dig my grave? And then I'm just like a bucket, because, it sort of, it hits you on this real level over and over and over again. And I'm, as far as I know, perfectly healthy. So I don't really have any, so I can't imagine, people that are really thinking about it like, hey, this is, like, I'm really making plans here. But if we think about it all our lives, then you're going to get better and better. I get better ideas all the time. So the more we think about it, then the clearer we're going to get, right?
My 5 wishes documents, I think I've slashed through, hacked things out.
Yeah.
When I first did them, they were so detailed, like I had to have 9,000 count thread, whatever.
Yeah.
Like, I don't care anymore.
Right.
Just take care
Yeah.
of me.
I've got stacks and stacks of, I filled out all the forms, looking for what are my favorite forms. And there's, but then when you get down to it, there's very few things that you really need to communicate. And there's going to be those things that are important to you, and just like a moment at a time. And I'm going to give one example of a very dear family friend who's essentially been dying of cancer for 12 years now and defying all odds. And she is really making plans with the death doula, and her husband, talking with her sons and her husband about it. And her husband wants to build her a casket because he's a woodworker, and he wants to pallbearer her out of their home with his sons. And then she's going to be cremated. So that whole being in a casket, not necessary for cremation, and certainly not pallbearers, but the only alteration we had to make in the plan with the funeral home is that they would bring a different kind of vehicle. Usually we just call it a transfer vehicle, and these days it's like a Suburban, not a hearse. But to put a casket in a vehicle, then a hearse, it's got rollers built in. It's easy. You just that's what it's made for. So then the funeral home will bring a hearse to their house so that he can have that moment, because that's what he wants. That's what's important to him. He doesn't want to have necessarily the whole funeral thing so that he can have that carrying the casket moment. But it's like, bam, you could hear it in his voice when he talked about it, that's what was important to him. And so you can accommodate whatever those things are that are important to you. My main thing, my sons are really into my hair. So I would like for my children to have access to my hair if they wish, to take some of my hair. That's my thing, so everybody knows. Okay, so I'm just going to have 2 more minutes to go through some just basic options. All right. Oh, the other thing about acknowledging you guys are being good elders by thinking about this. It doesn't matter how old we are to be good elders, but we're learning from each other, and we're teaching future generations how to do this by doing it. So, pat you on the back. All right. So I also want to say, just sort of like as a trigger warning, that I don't really like to get into like the nuts and bolts gross stuff, because guess what? There's some gross stuff at my job. But I'll talk to you about that separately if you want to ask anything, because I just want to respect that maybe not everybody wants to hear things like that, if that makes sense. Just out of, because it is just so, there's so much. So the way I like to think about disposition is if we think about it in terms of elements. What element appeals to you? So the most obvious one is cremation is fire. It's a lot of fire, 1,500 degrees for usually like two hours for a normal sized person, I guess. And I mean, the whole process, you know, there's like the heat up and cool down. So the whole process takes longer, but we're talking like a lot of fire for 2 hours. So if you don't like fire, I wouldn't pick cremation. There is a process called alkaline hydrolysis, which ends up with a very similar result to cremated remains, and it uses water, lye, and pressure. And that's like, I could nerd out for a lot longer than 8 minutes about alkaline hydrolysis. So if you're really keen on hearing about that, see me later. Currently not really widely around, so.
Do you all do it?
No, it's not even legal in North Carolina, so. Okay, so now, earth, burial. Now, we're all going to end up as bones one way or the other, or as sort of like a bag of dirt. Like, I figure a body is sort of like, eventually, you're a bag of dirt. Like, how do you get there? Cremation, you could be really fast bones, and then put with very acidic compost to balance out the alkalinity of your bones. You're a bag of dirt in like 4 days, maybe. You could be a bag of dirt, right? So, green burial, then you're going to end up a bag of dirt. It's just going to take a lot longer. I don't know, 2 years maybe? Who knows? We don't dig people up and look at their bones, so really we don't know.
Not for thousands of years.
Right, right. So what I like to call conventional burial is taking the body and putting it in things, and then putting it in more things, and then putting it in the ground. So, and there's reasons that people do that. You know, it's like, if that's what people feel comfortable with, then it's sort of like with cremated remains. You can keep them in an urn or scatter them. You know, it's just personal preference. But there are impacts to that. So, so this is just like my segue into green burial for Caroline to talk about, because she's doing it like the most legit conservation, like the most legit possible green burial way. So that's earth. Let's see, air, you could scatter cremated remains. One thing I heard that was neat was if you put flower petals with the cremated remains and dump them like out of a helicopter or something, then at least you can see the flower petals instead of just like shoop, you know. So visually, I like that visual. That seems nice, flower petals. And then, let's see, other elements. So you could be, I'm sorry, go ahead.
There's an old method, exposure.
Right.
That's there.
Yeah, that's not culturally relevant in the United States, although if you really wanted it, you could donate your body to the Body Farm in Tennessee, and then they would study it. So,
There's, and Western Carolina University.
uh-huh, yep, they're doing that now.
Studies as well.
Yes. So other elements could be water. Putting cremated remains in water is easier than putting a body in water. You can get buried at sea, especially if you're in the Navy. But then if you really wanted to be buried at sea, then that would be expensive. So anything's possible, but some things are expensive. So good thing to pre-plan about if you have an unusual request. So the whole element thing, I think that, you know, we're people, but then we're also like metaphors, right? And so your burial and your disposition, your funeral is a big metaphor for what your life was. So just to kind of hone in how to think about it, it's the last time someone's going to see you. you have to have a final resting place. It could be 1,000 different final resting places if you're in a bunch of little baby urns, but, or it could be one, you know, maybe a place that someone actually wants to go to, you know. So if you're picturing in your mind, if you can do this, like your final resting place, the last time someone sees you, and then like, what is that metaphor? So that's my suggestions to wrap your huge brains around all this huge stuff. Yeah.
I have
Yeah.
a question for you.
All right.
Because in one lineage of my family, my great-grandparents and great-great-aunt were cremated, and everybody down the line was cremated. My husband and I assumed we would be cremated too.
Mm-hmm.
And then he started thinking about, wait a minute, there's a chimney. And part of me is going to be in the smoke going up the chimney and lining the chimney, maybe with the...
Well, a crematory, the reason that you don't see smoke coming out of a crematory, and if you do see smoke coming out of a crematory, that's not a well-maintained crematory.
Okay.
Because a crematory has a secondary chamber that's hotter than the primary chamber. So the smoke goes to the secondary chamber, hits this basically like a steaming hot wall of brick within that chamber, and it burns the smoke. So the smoke is burned, and then you can just see heat vapor coming out of it. And if you see smoke coming out of a crematory, it's because they got a problem with the chambers. It's just not functioning properly, because you do have to maintain crematories, you know, and they, so anyway.
So
there shouldn't be
residue left somewhere.
No, it's burned, the residue's burned again, yeah. But then there's still things coming, I mean, just because you can't see smoke, there's still things going out into the atmosphere. And our bodies are dirty. You know, I mean, human beings probably have the most toxic, I mean, I don't know for sure, but yeah, our tissues are very, very dirty. We have a lot of toxins in our body, so I don't know. I can't imagine that. I mean, it's also using energy to run a crematory, but I use energy every day, so.
The other thing you mentioned that isn't legal or is not available here, the...
Alkaline hydrolysis?
Yes.
Yeah. I'll talk,
What happens to the...
yeah, it's so complicated, girl. It's complicated.
Hey, is there such a thing as green embalming, or is embalming just never a green? It's never going to be green.
Actually, you can,
Like a lot of lavender.
yeah. I mean, I would think at a certain point too, it's like using that much essential oils. You know, I don't know if that would be like really sustainable. No, but that is a thing. It is a thing, you know. It kind of is a thing. And then you can also use glutaraldehyde, which is a different chemical than formaldehyde. And I think that the Green Burial Council, I think that there are some chemicals. There's one company called Champion that makes embalming fluids that they're on the up and up. Like they have they have alternative fluids. So it kind of is a thing. That's pretty technical, and I'm looking into it, but I'm probably like one of not many people.
The body is an intact, you know, an intact body is a great vessel. We don't need to open it and take stuff out and then put stuff in. So
Especially not,
really, mostly-
especially not to green berry.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's what embalming is. Were you going to tell us the definition of what embalming is?
Embalming, we access the vascular system
Okay.
to introduce chemical
Okay.
that will disinfect, and it fixates the protein. It basically coagulates the protein to, you know, not 100% stop, but to stop the decomposition process. And it also removes bacteria from the system, because the reason that a body rots is because the cells start to digest themselves. Like enzymes break out of your cells and digest your cells. And then the bacteria from your gut and, moves around, spreads throughout your body, and then there's that process, So if you're taking some of the bacteria out and inactivating that protein breakdown process, then that's going to do things like stop odor, and we're talking about, it's not like somebody dies, and some living people smell bad, But so it's not like, oh, you die and then you start stinking or something. That's not necessarily the case at all whatsoever. But again, for me, when some people say like there's no point to embalming, that's not true, because if someone dies by having their face smashed open and then their family wants to see their face again, then guess what? You need a lot of stuff to fix somebody's face up like that. So, that doesn't come up very often in people's careers, but, I've been doing this for a couple years, and I've done it twice, and it's pretty it's an important thing to be able to do, that there are some people in your culture that can do it. So, I don't know why I'm going to be one, I don't know why I'm one of those people, but apparently that was like the plan. So, yes, ma'am.
So how many of the people who come for services at your crematory funeral home have the question, what's the toxic load to the environment of these different choices? I mean, do you hear that question a lot?
I'm making up a term right now. It's called green cremation. Green cremation means that you run your crematory in a sustainable way. In our building, we've got automatic light switches. You walk in, the lights come on. After you leave, or if you sit really still for long enough, the lights go off. We're careful about closing doors, not running the air conditioner like we do. We recycle, stuff like that. So we don't just turn on our crematory and just say like, oh yeah, it'll definitely be done in 4 hours, and leave the building. We stay there and we manage the process so that we're, I joked to Maggie the other day, she came over and looked, and she's a tiny person. I showed her the crematory, and I said, yeah, you'd probably only take an hour. But our crematory is rated to 800 pounds. And so other funeral homes bring their big bodies to us. And if someone weighs 500 pounds, they take a lot longer than Maggie to be cremated. So if you maintain your crematory well and manage the process well, then you can reduce that kind of, at least energy usage, and not putting a lot of like weird stuff in the box with the person that shouldn't be burned. There's that, I guess. And yeah. But yeah, I think people, that's a fairly uncommon question, but I would love it if people ask that question more.
Yeah, I think as more people have these conversations and start talking about it, I think more people will be aware. I had no clue about embalming and legality of it and reason for it. It started back, I learned during the Civil War time, when families, their loved ones died overseas and they wanted to see their loved ones buried on their land. So it makes sense, for that time and circumstance and various circumstances.
Oh, two other circumstances that I'm not gonna lie, I'm a fan of embalming. If someone is severely emaciated because of their manner of death, then you can restore some therapy. You can make them look better by just sort of like building up their tissues if they're very dehydrated and emaciated. Or if someone is in the hospital and has gotten 50 pounds of water weight, guess what? They're not going to look like themselves, so there are fluids that can help to draw down, generalized edema in the tissues. Because really what we're looking for is for people to look like themselves, and sometimes when people die, they don't look like themselves. So,
But we have to weigh that with the toxic load of all of the chemicals that will eventually leach You know,
Yeah.
after Katrina, there were cemeteries in New Orleans where the casket, the walls and the caskets were floating away, and all of that formaldehyde got
Right.
leached out.
Yeah.
Very
So
nice.
there is that, and I think it's also easy to make like death into like I'm gonna do like I have messed up my life, but I'm gonna do this right. And there's all these products and all this stuff that it's like to make it some kind of perfect thing, you know, like that you're perfectly not gonna have any kind of environmental impact. Like I drive a car every day. I mean, I do a lot of things. You know, I put my kids' food in little tiny baggies, and I'm like, really, with the baggies? I mean, there's things that I do that I'm not really proud of that are messing up the earth. And, you know, I try to make choices in my life every day to minimize those things. And so I'm going to use my mom's term here that, you know, if we're talking about our own deaths and looking at our own mortality, and then focusing on, like, kind of the minutia of it, Mom would call that a spiritual bypass. You're skirting around like the real thing about it. And to me, the real thing about it is that you're gonna feel some feelings, you know, when you're thinking about it. And it's okay to have feelings, and it's okay to move through that and to work through it. And so for me, the bigger conversation about death is not exactly like what we're doing or if we're doing the right thing or like, ooh, that guy picked a metal casket. Maybe they like metal. I mean, that's an element. So, you know, we are responsible for our own bodies and our own choices. And when we're thinking about death and talking about death and having feelings about it, we're talking about meaningful stuff. And that's the real problem, is that we don't talk about meaningful things. Not that we're not talking about death, is that we're not talking about meaningful things. So let's use death. Like third messenger. I asked Saeed the other day, what's third messenger? So I'm going to give you some, trying to figure it out. What is it? He said, third messenger, this is a group that Aditi and other, like Greg and people I are involved in. It's about looking at the positive aspects of death and dying. Because there really are some. There's a lot of creativity, there's a lot of art, there's a lot to share. So, you know, if my come from is that it's okay to talk about death. So if we're talking about death and dying and it's miserable and scary, then that doesn't feel okay. But even if we're like, you know, sad or having some feelings about it, but if it's like, you know, overall like a freeing, pretty joyful, even if it's sad, experience to talk about it, then that's congruent. That it's okay to talk about death, and I feel better for having talked about it and learned about it. Yeah.
I have to tell you that if you are the new generation of funeral directors, I am all for it.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm from Asheville, and my family has used a different funeral home than Ray's all these years, and I've never heard them raise their voice above a whisper. And they're all the time. I think that death might be joyful would give them a stroke. I think that it's magnificent that you are so animated and so realistic. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I would also like to say that from my perspective, I see a lot going on. I mean, I get to see what families pick out. And people are doing all kinds of stuff that's wonderful and meaningful. You know, we have delayed pickups all the time. You know, there's these, you know, rituals that, you know, maybe not everybody knows about them, but my gosh, I mean, singing songs, sharing the tributes. I mean, people do all kinds of stuff. I mean, and even if you're not bathing the body, you know, people picking out outfits or picking out nail polish colors or people coming in to do their loved one's hair. You don't have to do like the whole, going back to like, you don't have to do it so perfectly. You don't have to do all of it. do what appeals to you. If you want to do the program, the memorial program, because you're good at that kind of stuff, you know, please do those programs. They take me so long to do. You know, if somebody says like, oh, I want to do it this way, that way, I'm like, yeah, go for it. You know, do whatever, be involved in whatever way you want to be involved. And my soapbox comment about funeral service is, okay, first of all, funeral service is not it's not a cushy job, guys. It's hard. You got to work all the time. You got to get up in the morning. Get up in the middle of the night. It's like, there's a lot of difficult things about it. So, you know, guys that wear black suits and whisper, they're giving up a lot to do it. I mean, you know, some guys just aren't cool. Some funeral guys just aren't cool at all. But some of them are, you know, and find one that you like. Just, you know, if you go to talk to someone and you don't feel like they're listening to you, then just go somewhere else. I mean, we have to get called, you know, getting a call. Like someone comes in and says, I want to do this, this, this. I mean, unless it's completely not doable, they are not going to turn you away, you know? So funeral service is customer service. It's a service industry. We are going off of what people ask of us. So it's not, the onus is not on us to say, oh, your dad just died? Did you know that green burial exists and you can have a home funeral? And that's not the time for education. The people are already overwhelmed and they're coming to us to help them like whittle it down and put it into some kind of manageable thing. And they're doing the best that they can. They have their family traditions, but family traditions can change in one moment. If everybody in our family had always gotten traditional, conventional buried, right? Until somebody got cremated, and now everybody gets cremated. Until my mom has a home funeral and gets green buried, and then that'll be the thing that we do. So just change it, you know, like have your tradition, and if it's a crappy tradition, change it to a better one, and then you'll have a better one in your family. So, you know, it's not like Mr. Black Suit is gonna change your family tradition. That's not his job, that's your job. So box, that's all.
Can I say one thing that I
Yes,
learned?
absolutely.
One thing I learned during the home funeral training, which I found surprising, was that cremated remains are actually toxic to the land. Or when they're, I didn't know that.
Well, you can't plant a cremated remains, that's like a block of salt. If you plant a tree over cremated remains, its roots will grow around that because it's very, very alkaline. And if you mix it with something acidic and real soil too, then it can be like an amendment to the soil, but it's not soil. It's actually bones crushed up and brick dust out of the retort. You know, it's like part of a little bit of the crematory goes away with every time you.
Wow.
So there are ways
Pull the
to
person
amend
out.
it and make it
Yes.
so it's safer for the environment.
But all these products where it's like you're gonna put your urn in a pot and then a tree's gonna grow out of it, it's like, man, did they field test this at all? Because that's not how dirt works. The size, 200 cubic inches, most people will fit in an urn that big.
Unless you're Maggie.
Maggie, you can go to a head shop and get it.
She can get a 6-pack of tiny little things.
All right, Caroline.
I'm not going to be nearly as animated as Meredith here. My name is Caroline Yongue, and I am the director of a project called Center for End-of-Life Transitions and Carolina Memorial Sanctuary. So about 20 years ago, my spiritual Buddhist teacher asked me if I would learn how to take care of dead bodies. And I thought she was crazy. And, but I trusted her, and I started reading the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying and understood why she made the request. So from a Buddhist perspective, it can take up to 3 days
for what the Buddhists call conditioning and karma to leave the body. And some people call that a soul. So I started reading about it, and then through good fortune, I was able to help an animal. And then my friends knew that I was trying to study this, and they asked their dying loved ones if they would let me train with them. And so I've learned a lot. What I came to understand, that no one was prepared. Nobody had done their directives. Nobody had thought about death. If they had thought about dying, they may have done a living will and healthcare power of attorney. Nobody thought about what to do with their body. So through all that, I've learned a lot, and it's been an incredible journey. So death is now my life. All right, so I'm going to show you here. There are photographs of deceased bodies. Does anybody have a problem with that? Okay. So I want to let you know what a home funeral is. So I am what's called a death care midwife, and I am also a doula for the dying. And I've seen a lot of what family members and loved ones can do in the care of their family member or friend who has died. And even when people think they can't do something, just know that you can ask, is there something that I can do? Can I do this differently? Can I go around the system that has always been done? The same old family traditions. At the hospital, I'm taking this person out of the hospital. Even if you get up against a fight, know that you can keep asking, okay?
Do you have a difference between death doula and that other term?
Death care midwife. Now I do, because we've been doing this for so long. So to me, a death care midwife is someone that takes care of the body after death. Okay, they're actually taking care of that body. All right? To me, a doula is a person that helps someone prepare for their death. They're walking with them, they're supporting them, they're helping them, they're asking questions, and helping them to decide what do I want the rest of my life and my death to look like. And it also may then include the care of the body. Okay, but we're walking with this person to help them be prepared. All right. And for me, both of these projects are all faiths projects. I do not impose my Buddhist beliefs on anybody. I learned so much from all the different faith traditions. Okay. So device. Let's see here. So it used to be that, 100 years ago, or not even that long ago, home funerals were the thing to do, and green burial was the thing to do. When a death happened, it usually happened in the home, and at death, then the women would help bathe and dress the body. It laid in state in the parlor. The men were digging the grave and making a casket. And usually there was a wake. Sometimes that would be there for 3 days. And I found out that even my grandmother and grandfather, my mother's parents, I never met them. He was a small town doctor, and when somebody died, they went as a couple, and she helped take care of the body, which I somehow absorbed through my mother, and then he would help with pronouncing death, and then help with the casket making and things like that. But we've forgotten that it is still legal and that we still have the right to do it. So that's the thing. Both of these, Center for End-of-Life Transitions, primarily is we want you to know that you have options. We make assumptions that the beliefs that we hold are true, and a lot of times they're not true. But we've heard it so many times, we think it is true. So we now have a time when the medical and the funeral industry do provide a lot of service. And we've handed over the care towards the end of life where, it's shifting now, but people would die in the hospital, or death was a medical emergency. And we handed over the death care of our loved ones to professionals. And it's not that I think that everyone should have a home funeral, but again, for some people it works and for some people it doesn't. So we can take back the caring of our loved ones into our own homes. This person, Paulus, he taught at Penland School of the Arts, And he knew at the beginning of 2000 and, what year is this? 18, 17, 16. And at the end of 2016, he knew he wanted to prepare for his death. He was getting older. He really didn't have any health conditions that would cause his death immediately, but he knew he needed to prepare. So he found out about the cardboard coffins that Carol Motley makes with Bury Me Naturally. And then she brought me along and Ruth Ostringa along to talk about Center for End of Life Transitions and the Carolina Memorial Sanctuary. So he was so excited about preparing for his own death. He told me he was an artist. He did lots of mediums and art, and in the 70s he had bought a shroud that he carried around with him all of his life, and he was in his 80s, that he knew he was going to be buried in. And so we took him that coffin, and then at the end of 2016, he had a big party at Penland, and people decorated his coffin while he was still alive, because he wanted those artists to help him. At the beginning of 2017, he stopped taking his medications, and then the middle of 2017, he had a stroke, and which was what he wanted. He didn't want to be a burden to anybody, and he ended up at Care Partners Solace. And so even when he came out to the Carolina Memorial Sanctuary and picked out a spot, and there again he was excited. He kept saying, "I'm going to be changing my address." He wanted to have his mail forwarded to me. And so when Paulus was leaving Care Partners Solace, some of his friends from Penland had a pickup truck with a camper on it. They made an altar in the back of it, and they pulled it up to Care Partners Solace. And we liberated Paulus out of Care Partners and put him in the back of the truck. And then we drove in a procession out to Penland. He lay and stayed in his home for 3 days. And then we loaded him back up in the truck at the end of 3 days and drove him back to Mills River to be buried at Carolina Memorial Sanctuary. But that was what Paulus wanted. And everybody, all of his loved ones and friends, were thrilled to have that happen.
I lost my firstborn son,
Is that coming out of here?
Zy Keenan Ray, in a motorcycle accident
Can you hear?
on Monday, February 13, 2009. And the next morning when my sister came over, she was practicing, or I should say in practice, if that's the correct terminology, to become a death doula. And I know that many people know what a birth doula is. I didn't know that there was such a concept, a job as a death doula. I think that's pretty cool on so many levels. And she talked about that she felt there was an alternative for Zy. And we started discussing, she started telling me about the Center for the End of Life Transition and doing a home funeral. And it was if a light just, a light shined. And it wasn't like we said, oh, we'll have to get back to you, or we'll have to think about this. It was like suddenly, that was it. Of course, for me, it made it seem like this is really happening, because even the solutions that we'd asked for are now presenting themselves. The hospital was so uncomforting, so detached, that Wesley and Maureen had not been able to be so strong-willed at the hospital. Like, we're taking his body home. Wrap him up, do whatever it takes, he's going home. But you know, I ain't It was all personal without having to put out flowers. It was us. It was us. That was his space. Had he been anywhere else, I don't think I fully would have been able to say goodbye.
So one of the things I push for is for people to do your advanced care and after-death care directives. Okay, you can think about it all you want. Unless you put it in writing, it may not happen. And even if you do put it in writing, you need to let people know where your directives are. Don't put them in a safe. Don't put them in a safety deposit box. Put them in your freezer. Almost everybody has a freezer unless I was told you live at Earth Haven, and then you might not have a freezer. But put them in a place where, and tell everybody, my advanced care directives are right there in the freezer door.
Can I add one thing to that? Also tell them what's in them, because sometimes people can't read when they're upset. So if they talked about it before and you told them your wishes, then they know, the process and things to go.
Have a conversation.
Yeah.
That's good. And know what learn about what your options are. By being here, you've learned that you have different options that you knew you had before you walked in the door. Your assumptions may not be accurate, and make informed decisions, all right? Find out what you need to know, okay? And you don't have to wait till you're dying to get a DNR. If you know you don't want it, you can get one now. Yeah. It is legal to have home funerals in almost every state in the country. And we've talked about that could mean anything from the body laying in state for a few hours or for days, all right? So the North Carolina law says that the family of the deceased or a person the deceased appoints can take care of doing the death certificate, they can provide a home funeral, they can construct or purchase a container for final disposition, such as a coffin or a casket or shroud, and they can transport the deceased loved one in their own vehicles, okay?
They can do the death certificate.
You can gather the information. One of the things in our classes is we hand out a blank death certificate. You fill out the top part of it, and you put that with your advanced care directives. Because there's some information on there your friends and loved ones might have a hard time finding. So you go ahead and fill out your own death certificate. You can put the cause of death. You can put the date of death if you want. Yes?
One of the reasons that I wanted to come tonight is because my father lives in Tennessee and wants no conversation whatsoever, and I am his only surviving heir. And so for me, I would really appreciate knowing, how do I find out about this particular law in another state? Is there a space that I can go on the internet?
There is. I can't remember what the name of the book is. It's
Final rights.
Final Rights, that's right. And it goes state by state and tells what the laws are. You can even, they'll give you one free, you can print out the laws for one state for free. Final Rights.
Thank you.
Thanks.
If you have no family, who gets the death certificate?
Well, it'd be a funeral home.
And if you're not using a funeral home?
Somebody will have to walk that information through if you're not using a funeral home. Or it could be a friend.
A friend could do it.
Yeah. Yeah. We talked about this already. So these are photographs of, these are all women in these photographs who are having a home funeral. The woman on the left, this is day 3 that she has been laying in state. The same is true for the one on the top right. And we can't see the face of the person on the bottom right, but and they were all different, but they were all beautiful. The woman on the top right is a mother of a friend of mine, and she's Catholic, and her daughter is Buddhist like me, and Tony would tell all her friends she was having a Buddha funeral. But she was so happy to let her daughter take charge of her body and do the practices that would help her daughter. And the woman on the left, there's a story in our website. Deneen is this person. She wrote It's kind of weird, you'd have to jump and it comes back on. She wrote a poem about coming to a home a year before. A friend of hers was lying underneath that lace. And the poem was about one day she would be lying under that lace. And then she had a recurrence of her cancer and died a year later. So this is out at Earth Haven. The previous photograph, the bottom right, was a home funeral they had at Earth Haven. They do very beautiful rituals there. And they have, I won't say who that is. Yes. And so and this is her burial. They've created a small cemetery at Earth Haven now in their community to take care of their community members who die. And here again, these are more photographs of Paulus. He wanted his hair dyed blue before he died. And he was a potterer, and they had one of his clay pots that was not fired, so they dissolved it, and they painted his body with clay. And it was really beautiful. Oh, I'm pointing this. This, Jan died at Care Partners Solace, and Jan had received chemotherapy and radiation not long before she died. So sometimes when that is the case, the body, with the chemotherapy and radiation, they're eating up cancer cells, and the decomposition of the body can be accelerated. So I know to watch for signs. There's a smell, there's a sound, and there's a sight that you can tell when a person shouldn't lay in state for 3 days. So her husband had wanted to bring her home, and in dressing her, we discovered she should not go home. But Care Partners let her stay there for 6 hours, so her friends and family could be there with her before she was, the funeral home came and picked her up and provided transportation for refrigeration. So it was important for them to have her lay in state for 3 days. Refrigeration's the next best thing, because the body's not going to be disturbed, and she was cremated after the 3-day period. So for many, many years, the people that we helped were cremated. And in 2007, I became interested in the idea of conservation burial, found some land in Black Mountain, but the economy flopped. And so then I was approached by Unity of the Blue Ridge and Mills River about starting a conservation burial ground for them. And it turns out that our Buddhist group purchased the land from them, and so we started a conservation burial ground out there. And I'll tell you what that means. This is the only one in North Carolina. So green burial is, what makes up green burial is the body cannot have been embalmed. The casket, shroud, or urn has to be biodegradable. The graves are dug 3 feet deep instead of 6. The state law says there has to be 18 inches of earth over the body, and that creates what is called a smell barrier, so that animals can't smell the body, all right, and then want to dig it up. They would use natural markers for headstones and use no burial vaults or grave liners. Okay, so that's green burial.
What examples do you have of the head markers that people would use?
Metal or native stone. It could be Italian granite, it could be marble, it could be something like that. So we try to use native stone. Okay? So now we're going to add another layer on top of that is conservation burial. So still with all the green burial practices that we just said, now there's a conservation easement on the whole land. So what that means is that we pay a conservation group to monitor what we say we're going to do. If we don't do it, they're going to come get us legally. So that means that we are protecting the way we do invasive plant management, that the way we reestablish native plants, the way we take care of waterways, how many buildings we can build, how tall they can be or not be, the colors we can use. It's very strict. And we coordinate with them to set these guidelines up in advance. I want to make sure that when I die, nobody's going to paint one of these buildings turquoise. So I'm working with them to craft this document so that I can protect this land. All right?
How much acreage is?
We have 11 and a bit acres, which is small. And the way we got around the North Carolina Cemetery Commission guidelines is that it's a church-owned cemetery, so we are exempt from the North Carolina Cemetery Commission guidelines. That's how we got around it. That's the only way you could do it in North Carolina. Okay? Our Buddhist group did. Our Buddhist group is a church. Okay? But it's an all faiths burial ground. All right. So we use low impact vehicles. Golf carts we allow to drive on the trails inside the sanctuary, and we even are limited to the size of the bigger machines that come in to do bush hogging and things like that. We have lower burial density. On 11 acres, we will probably do 3,000 body burials instead of, I forget what the density is for a regular cemetery, probably 11,000. And because we don't want to open every inch of earth, we're working with Conserving Carolina and Hendersonville, and if we start to run out of land here in Mills River, we will look in their land bank to see if there's another piece of property that would be suitable for an extension of conservation burial. The graves are dug by hand.
Not in an hour. If I could say something about digging graves by hand, because I did at Carolina Memorial Sanctuary.
She did, the first one, right?
Yeah. And so that is something that is participatory. And I would think that you would like for it to be participatory because it's a lot of work. And what do you say, like that 10 man hours?
About 10 hours, yeah.
Yeah, and we're talking about a man who knows how to use a shovel, man hours. So I think for me personally, I know a grave digger who's a super grave digger, and also, like, I feel like he could lead a group of men in doing that, and I'm saying a group of men because for me, that's what it feels like, you know, like my husband, my brother, my dad, you know, like they would do it. Yeah, so that's one of the ways that you can participate, you know. And when you were talking about 100 years ago, or not even, women would take care of the body and men would build the coffin and dig the grave. And, you know, we've forgotten how to do that. Like, how many guys do you know that could just, like, build a piece of furniture? Like a sturdy, good-looking piece of furniture. So, you know, you got to pull people together that know how to do it and work together, you know? And
at the sanctuary, we have 3 on-call grave diggers. 3 of them are women and 2 are men. And then we have this sanctuary steward, Anthony, who's there, who's coordinating it all. But it takes a lot of time, and we're very careful about the way the earth is taken out. We take out the root mass, we put it in one pile, there's another layer, which I don't know what it's called, it goes in another pile, and then the majority of the earth is put in a third pile.
And you would have families that if they wanted to participate.
It's not as easy to dig a grave. So to coordinate that, we've got to get the grave dug.
Yeah.
We've had it happen one time with Paulus. We met somebody there to let him help dig. We do, everybody helps participate in closing the grave. So for logistic reasons, we don't encourage the opening of the grave. It can be dangerous, and we just want to be very careful. It's not impossible, but we're just looking out right now for liability. Okay, so why green burial? So in a conventional cemetery, a 10-acre cemetery contains enough coffin wood to construct 40 houses, nearly 1,000 tons of casket steel. They say enough to build another Golden Gate Bridge every year. 20,000 tons of concrete vault, and enough toxic, carcinogenic, embalming fluid to fill a backyard swimming pool. That's in just 10 acres. So green and conservation burial is a half to third the cost of conventional funerals, burials I would say. So it's economical. It's simple. You can see the 3 piles of earth up there on the top. And that's Carol Motley's cardboard coffin. That's the only cardboard coffin we will let be used at the sanctuary. It's eco-friendly, and it's beautiful. And it is family and friend focused. We want them to participate. So we offer, conservation burial grounds will offer natural burial, which means the body is being buried. They will offer burial of cremated remains. At Carolina Memorial Sanctuary, to have the cremated remains buried there, the guests agree that we will amend the ashes. There's a company called Let Your Love Grow and one called Living Urn, and they have made amendments that specifically address the salty and alkaline nature of ashes. So to be buried, for us to deal with ashes here, that's an agreement that we have. And so with the Living Urn, it's in a container like an egg carton material. So you put the ashes in the bottom, you put a soil amendment on top, and then there's another thing that goes on top of that, and then that is buried. But to scatter cremated remains, we use this other amendment that's called Let Your Love Grow. And we let the ashes sit for 4 months before we will scatter them. They've turned to soil by that time. Because if we were to scatter ashes, we learned this from experience, if you scatter the ashes on the ground, it's going to kill the plants there. And nothing will grow where that scattering has happened. We do pet burials. We are what's called a whole family cemetery. If you purchase a spot for yourself and you want your pet to be buried next to you, you can have your pet buried next to you. We also do have a small pet memorial garden. So this is a native stone. So what we're looking for native stone means that it is, to us, field stone is the best stone because it's unearthed when farmers are plowing fields versus a quarried stone where we're taking a mountain down to get it. Okay, so at the Carolina Memorial Sanctuary, we don't want quarried stone and we don't want river stone because river stone, you're disrupting the habitat, the bed of the creek or the river when you take that stone. So we won't allow any of those stones at the sanctuary. So I've only got 12 minutes left. So Kathy, these photographs now are of Kathy Jennings. She took a home funeral class with me and Ruth at the end of 2015. Beginning of 2016, she found out she had cancer. And so she wanted her dying and death to be an education to people. So they had a photographer come and take pictures and wanted us to share these. So she died at home, and Ruth Ostringa helped. Ruth was her doula. And Ruth is also with Center for End of Life Transitions. And so she died at home, and she is wrapped there in one of Carol Motley's shrouds that she had made. I can't remember the woman's name now who makes them. Christy, yeah. And so that white thing is a body carrier. It's called a mega mover. We use those when doing home funerals, when we need to move a body from upstairs to downstairs or into the car or around. And so she's laying in state in the home. And this is what she wanted. So they created, she died in her bedroom, and they created an altar in the studio that she had. And she died on a Saturday morning, and she was buried the next evening, on Sunday evening. The choice was made that they wanted to bury sooner and not do the 3 days. So this is her husband and daughter, and they're able to take care of decorating the shrouded body. And now they're carrying her, on the left, they're carrying her out of the house. You'll probably see folks in here. Some of you may even be in these pictures. So you can imagine these people now are watching them bring the body out of the house. They've never seen this before. Never witnessed that before. So they were going to take her to be placed in the family car to bring out to the sanctuary. Now this is out at Carolina Memorial Sanctuary. This woman on the left, I was standing beside her and she was crying. I went and stood next to her, and she said, of all the things she's seen in her entire life, this is the most beautiful thing she had ever seen, was the family and loved ones taking care of Kathy. And her daughter helped to cover the grave the entire time. We had a little shovel, and she worked the whole time helping to cover the grave. There's something about being able to tend the body after death and then carry it in your own car and have somebody you love say words around your loved one and lift them into the grave yourself. There's something about that, and then cover the grave that is so healing. The grief process is very different for people who can touch and love on their loved ones after they die versus picking up a phone and then they're whisked away.
Is that covering that carries the body put right in the grave?
So no, it's not. They've lifted her out on that orange fabric, and they're laying her down into the grave with that. We have used the carrier before, and then we unroll it. There's a way to tilt the body to unroll it and pull it out, but it's got a plastic. It's kind of plastic, so we wouldn't put that in there. There you have it. So I have a very short video of the sanctuary. It takes about 2 minutes. Do you want to see that? It's just an aerial thing of it.
Carolina Memorial Sanctuary provides eco-friendly natural burials. Simple, economical, beautiful, and environmentally friendly. Preserve, protect, and renew the land with your burial. Reduce carbon footprint and contribute to the natural ecocycle. Honor the forgotten old ways. Protect and restore wildlife habitat. Return to the beauty of the land. A resting place in nature. Pets have a resting place too. Meadows, creekside, woodlands. A sanctuary open to the public with walking trails for you, your loved ones, and pets. Each year, conventional funeral and burial practices consume 77,000 hardwood and tropical trees for caskets, use 1.6 million tons of reinforced concrete for vaults, use 7.3 million gallons of embalming fluid containing the carcinogen formaldehyde, and use 81,500 tons of copper, bronze, and steel. Green cemetery use of these materials? 0. There is a different way. Protect the environment, conserve the land, and be one with nature.